The homeless under the bridge in South Boston stood frozen like statues, their breath catching in the cold December air. A convoy of 3 glossy black Maybach sedans had just screeched to a halt at the edge of the underpass, engines humming with a quiet menace that echoed off the concrete pillars. This was the underbelly of Boston, a place where luxury cars like these never appeared unless something terrible was about to happen. The doors of the middle car opened and a man stepped out. He was tall, devastatingly handsome, his features carved like they had been chiseled from marble by an artist who understood both beauty and danger. He wore a 3-piece charcoal suit that cost more than most people earned in a year, a black cashmere coat draped over his shoulders, and Italian leather shoes that gleamed despite the grimy pavement. His dark hair was swept back with precision, his jaw shadowed with a hint of stubble, and his eyes, those storm-gray eyes, scanned the darkness beneath the bridge with the cold calculation of a predator surveying his domain. This was Donald. In Boston, everyone knew his name. In fact, the entire East Coast knew it. The boss of the Vale family, ruler of an underground empire that stretched from Massachusetts to New York. The man whose whispered name made seasoned criminals tremble. The man whose enemies disappeared without a trace. The man who could buy politicians, judges, and entire city blocks without blinking. But today Dominic was not here for business. Not here to collect debts. Not here to eliminate a rival. He was walking straight toward a woman. She sat slumped against a concrete pillar, wrapped in a torn blanket that had long lost its color. Her clothes were rags layered and filthy, salvaged from dumpsters and donation bins. Her hair, which might once have been a rich chestnut brown, hung in matted tangles around a face that was gaunt and hollow. Her cheekbones jutted out sharply beneath skin that was pale and papery, marked with bruises both old and new. Her hands, thin and trembling, clutched the blanket around her shoulders. But it was her eyes that made Dominic stop in his tracks. Even sunken into dark hollows, even glazed with exhaustion and despair, those eyes held something. A flicker of intelligence. A ghost of the person she used to be. She did not run when she saw him approaching. Everyone else had scrambled away the moment the Maybachs appeared, scattering into the shadows like rats fleeing a flood. But she remained perfectly still, staring at him with an emptiness that suggested she had long stopped caring whether she lived or died. Dominic stopped in front of her, less than a meter away. His bodyguards hung back, hands hovering near their concealed weapons, exchanging confused glances. Their boss, the most feared man in Boston, was standing in a puddle of filth, looking down at a homeless woman like she was the most important person in the world. "My name is Dominic," he said. His voice was low and smooth with an edge that could cut glass. The woman blinked slowly, as if processing his words required enormous effort. She replied. Her voice was hoarse, cracked from disuse and dehydration. Then, before anyone had time to breathe, he said something that made his own bodyguards question their hearing. "I have been watching you," Dominic said, his voice soft but unwavering. "For the past 3 weeks I have had people observing this place. I saw how you saved that child last week, the one with the fever. You had nothing but dirty water and torn rags, yet you brought his temperature down with a precision that would impress any physician. I watched you give your food to the weaker ones, even when you were starving yourself. I know who you are. I know you were once Alina Cross, the youngest neurosurgeon ever appointed at Massachusetts General Hospital. I know about Harvard. I know about the lives you saved. And I know about everything they took from you." His heart was pounding, though his face remained impassive. "I do not know exactly what broke you. I do not know if you can ever be fixed. But I believe, truly believe, that you do not belong in this place. You just need a second chance." Alina stared at him without expression. No one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had seen anything in her except a broken shell, a ghost of a woman who had lost everything and everyone. So Dominic drew a breath. "I have a son who is broken just like you. I need someone to fix him, and I can give you a reason to live." He looked straight into her hollow eyes. "I am offering you a deal, Alina. Will you marry me?" The underpass fell completely silent. A drunk man clutching a bottle froze mid-sip. 2 teenagers who had been watching from behind a pillar looked at each other in disbelief. One of Dominic's bodyguards actually took a step backward, certain he had misheard. Alina's cracked lips parted slightly. This had to be a hallucination. Perhaps she had finally lost her mind completely. There was no way a man like him, a man who could have anyone and anything, would propose to a destroyed creature like her. A bitter smile crossed her face, the first expression she had shown in what felt like years. "If you are really serious," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "prove it. Show me you are not just pitying a stray dog." The bodyguards exchanged alarmed glances. Did this homeless woman just challenge their boss? Dominic Vale, who had killed men for lesser insults? But Dominic did not flinch. He did not look offended. He did knock away. Instead, he did something that would become legend in the Boston underworld. He shrugged off his cashmere coat, worth $50,000, and draped it gently over Alina's frail shoulders. Then, in his perfectly tailored suit, Dominic Vale, the most feared Mafia boss on the East Coast, lowered himself onto one knee. The concrete was wet and filthy. The stench of urine and rot surrounded him. His $1,000 trousers pressed into the grime. He did not. From his inner pocket he produced a small velvet box. He opened it to reveal a ring that caught even the dim light under the bridge and transformed it into fire. A flawless diamond, at least 5 carats, set in platinum, surrounded by smaller stones that sparkled like captured stars. This ring was worth more than everything under this bridge combined. More than everything Alina had ever owned, even in her previous life. "I am Dominic Vale," he said, his storm gray eyes locked onto hers. "I have never knelt before anyone." "No. But I am kneeling before you, Alina Cross. Will you be my wife?" The homeless who had been watching from the shadows crept closer, unable to believe what they were seeing. Phones appeared from nowhere, filming the impossible scene. Alina looked down at the man kneeling before her. The man who had everything. The man who ruled an empire of darkness. The man who was now offering her something she had lost so long ago she had forgotten what it felt like. Hope. Her eyes burned with tears she thought had dried up years ago. She nodded almost imperceptibly at first, then more firmly. "Yes," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I will." The underpass erupted with gasps and murmurs. Dominic slid the ring onto her finger, her hand so thin and frail that the ring nearly slipped off. He stood and helped her to her feet, steadying her when she swayed. "Now get in the car," he said gently. She hesitated, looking down at her filthy rags, her cracked skin, the dirt embedded under her nails. "I will ruin your seats," she said quietly. "That car probably costs more than everything I have ever owned in my entire life combined." "I do not care, Dominic. Leather can be cleaned. This moment." Alina let him guide her toward the Maybach. She had no idea that her story was only just beginning. If you have watched this far, what do you think about this moment? Where in the world are you watching from? I truly want to know how far this story will travel. What do you think will happen when Alina steps into Dominic's world? Subscribe to the channel to follow the next part of this incredible journey. The Maybach glided through the streets of Boston as smoothly as a dream, streetlights flickering past the windows like falling stars drifting down to earth. Alina sat silently in the back seat, her body sinking into soft leather she had not touched in many years. The diamond ring on her finger caught the light each time they passed beneath a lamp, heavy with a promise she did not dare believe was real. She glanced at Dominic beside her, the man who had knelt before her beneath a foul-smelling bridge, the man Boston itself feared, now staring out the window with an expression she could not read. She wanted to ask why, wanted to ask what he truly wanted from someone as broken as she was. But her throat was dry and the words felt as though they had died long ago in her chest. 20 minutes later, the motorcade stopped before a massive iron gate, 2 stone lions standing guard on either side like gods protecting another world. The gate slowly opened and Alina had to stifle a gasp at what appeared before her. Vale Estate was not a house, it was a castle. Towers of light illuminated a stone-paved drive leading to a 3-story mansion faced in white granite, tall windows glowing with warm golden light, and a massive fountain at the center of the courtyard where an angel spread its wings. She had lived in a mansion on Beacon Hill, had thought she understood wealth, but this belonged to an entirely different class, one she had never imagined touching, especially not in her current filthy and reeking state. Dominic stepped out and opened her door, extending his hand as though she were a lady at a gala rather than a homeless woman pulled from beneath a bridge. Alina hesitated, staring at her own hands, at blackened nails, cracked skin, wounds that had not healed. She did not deserve to touch anything here. But Dominic did not wait. He took her hand and gently drew her from the car, his grip warm and steady around her trembling fingers. They ascended the stone steps as the enormous oak doors opened as if they had been waiting. Inside, a line of servants stood in perfect black and white uniforms, all unable to hide their shock at the sight of Alina. She knew what they were thinking. They saw her tangled hair like a crow's nest, her gray bruised skin, the ragged foul-smelling clothes she had worn for months. They wondered if their master had lost his mind or if this was some cruel joke. "Yeah." Dominic offered no explanation. In his familiar cold voice, he simply ordered a bath prepared in the main guest suite, new clothes, and a hot meal immediately. The servants scattered like shadows, and Dominic led Alina across the marble hall, up a curved staircase with intricately carved railings, through corridors lined with oil paintings she guessed were each worth a house. At last they stopped before double mahogany doors. Dominic opened them and stepped aside. "This is your room," he said, his voice still emotionless though his gaze lingered on her face longer than necessary. "The bathroom is. You may stay as long as you wish. No one is allowed in without your permission." Alina stepped inside and had to grip the doorframe to keep from collapsing. The room was larger than the apartment she once shared with David and their 2 children. A king-sized bed dressed in white silk sheets, pillows piled high and soft, cream velvet curtains falling from a soaring ceiling, a leather sofa before a softly crackling fireplace, and tall windows overlooking a moonlit garden. She stood there amid all that luxury, dressed like a beggar, and suddenly felt like a stain on pristine white fabric. "I will leave you alone," Dominic said from behind her. "Rest. We will talk in the morning." Then the door closed, his footsteps fading down the hall. Elena remained motionless for a long while, unsure what to do. Then she noticed the bathroom door slightly ajar, warm steam drifting out, scented faintly with lavender. She entered like a sleepwalker. The bathroom was clad in white marble, a massive tub already filled with hot water and thick white foam, scented candles lit around it casting a gentle glow. Elena peeled away the rags from her body one layer at a time, as though shedding the hell of the past years. She stepped into the tub, and the warm water wrapped around her gaunt body like a tender embrace she had long forgotten. The water darkened to gray, then black, as dirt and dried blood washed from her skin. She soaked and scrubbed every inch as if trying to cleanse not only grime but memory, pain, the years of being forgotten beneath a bridge. When she stepped out and wrapped herself in the soft cotton robe left for her, her eyes drifted to the large mirror on the wall, and she froze. Who was the woman staring back? It could not be her. Hollow cheeks with bones jutting beneath ashen skin, eyes sunken like dark pits, heavy shadows beneath them, lips cracked and scared by the mark that ran from mouth to cheek, the scar she earned in prison when she fought back. Her neck was mottled with bruises fading to yellow, her collarbones sharp beneath fragile skin. Was this her? Was this Dr. Elena Cross, once admired at Harvard, who had saved hundreds of patients, who once had a loving husband and 2 angelic children? She no longer recognized herself. What had she become? Tears spilled over. For the first time in many years she could still cry. She thought the tears had dried up long ago, her heart turned to stone, yet here in this lavish bathroom, facing the mirror's reflection of her ruin, she wept. Silent tears traced down a face that was clean for the first time in years. She dressed in the silk nightgown laid out on the bed, the cool fabric soft as clouds against her scarred body, then lay down, her back sinking into the mattress. She could not remember the last time she had slept in a bed. For 2 years she had slept on frozen concrete, on damp cardboard, curled in darkness beneath a bridge with rats scurrying nearby. Now she lay here, in the castle of Boston's most powerful Mafia boss, a diamond ring worth a fortune on her finger. Was this a dream or a new hell? She didn't know. She only knew she was too exhausted to think. She closed her eyes, and for the first time after countless endless nights, she drifted into sleep without the roar of traffic, without biting cold, without the fear of being attacked in the dark. There was only silence, warmth, and a future she did not dare imagine. To understand why Dominic Vale, the most ruthless Mafia boss in the Northeast, knelt before a homeless woman beneath a bridge, we must turn the clock back 36 years, to the night when everything began. The Vale estate was as grand then as it is now, but the air inside was heavy, as if mourning hung in every room. In the delivery chamber, a woman lay dying on the bed, blood soaking the white sheets, while the thin cry of a newborn pierced the air. Isabella Vale, the wife Victor Vale loved more than his own life, was drawing her final breaths after giving birth to their first son. The doctors had done everything they could, but she had lost too much blood, and in the very moment the child opened his eyes to the world, the mother closed hers forever. Victor stood by his wife's bed, staring at her hand as it grew cold, then turned to the infant wailing in the nurse's arms, and in his eyes there was no love for the son who had just been born, only pure hatred. "You killed your mother," Victor whispered, his voice frozen as ice. "You owe me a life." Those were the first words Dominic Vale ever heard in this world, though he was far too young to understand them then, but in the years that followed he would understand them more deeply than anyone. Victor Vale never held his son, never said he loved him, never looked at him with anything but coldness and sometimes disgust. Dominic was raised by servants, educated by tutors, yet completely deprived of the warmth of family. Whenever he tried to approach his father, Victor would drive him away as one would swat an irritating animal. "Go away," Victor would. "I do not want to see your face." Dominic at 5 years old did not understand why his father hated him so much. He only knew that when he looked in the mirror, he saw eyes exactly like his mother's, and perhaps that was why his father could not bear his existence. But Victor Vale was not merely a distant father, he was a Mafia boss, and he was determined to forge his son into a worthy heir in the only way he knew, through violence and iron discipline. When Dominic was 7, Victor took him down into the basement of the estate, where a man was tied to a chair, his face smeared with blood, moaning and begging. "This is a traitor," Victor said calmly, as if introducing a piece of furniture. "He sold our family's information to our enemies. You will watch how I deal with him." Dominic wanted to cover his eyes, to block his ears, to flee that dark cellar, but Victor's hand closed like steel on his shoulder and forced him to look. For the next 2 hours, 7-year-old Dominic watched his father torture a human being in ways even nightmares could not imagine. The man's screams haunted Dominic's sleep for years afterward. "If you cry," Victor said when it was over, "you will be the next one on that chair. A Vale man is not allowed to be weak." Dominic. From that night on, he learned to swallow his tears, to turn his face into a mask without emotion, to bury everything soft and human into the deepest depths of his soul. At 12, Dominic was taught to shoot, not at paper targets in a range, but at living ones. Victor placed a pistol in his hand and pointed to a captured enemy, saying this was a test. "If you do not pull the trigger, I will shoot you instead." Dominic remembered how his hand shook holding the gun, how the man knelt on the floor begging, how his father's cold eyes watched from behind, and he remembered the explosion, the recoil, the way the man collapsed with a bullet hole in his forehead. He did not. He looked his father in the eye and said it was done, his voice steady. Victor smiled at his son for the first time, a smile cold as ice but still a smile. "Very good. Perhaps you are useful for something after all." It was the first and almost the last time Dominic ever received recognition from his father, and he hated himself for feeling happy about it. At 16, Dominic killed deliberately for the first time, not as a test, but because the man had threatened the Vale Empire. At 18, he was already leading his own private enforcement crew. At 20, Victor formally presented him as the heir. Dominic grew up believing that love was a fatal weakness, that family was merely a bond of blood ruled by obligation and power, that trusting someone meant handing them the knife to stab you in the back. He built walls around his heart, higher and thicker with each passing year, until no one could reach him anymore. Yet deep inside, in the darkest corner of his soul that he never dared to face, there lived a 7-year-old child still yearning to be held, to be loved, to be seen as a human being rather than a tool. That child was still alive, no matter how hard Dominic had tried to kill it for so many years. But to understand why the woman beneath the bridge made Dominic stop in his tracks, we must know who she was before fate ground her into dust. 6 years earlier, the name Dr. Alina Cross was a legend in the medical world of Massachusetts. At the age of 30, she became the youngest neurosurgeon ever appointed at Massachusetts General Hospital, one of the most prestigious hospitals in the United States. Professors at Harvard Medical School still spoke of her as a once-in-a-century genius, the valedictorian who graduated with a flawless record no one in the school's history had ever surpassed. Alina possessed hands born to save lives, long agile fingers capable of performing the most complex brain surgeries with millimeter precision. She saved hundreds of patients other doctors had given up on, restored hope to families who believed they had already lost everything. Every morning she walked into the hospital, nurses and young doctors watched her with admiration, and every evening when she left, she knew she had done something that mattered in this world. But her career was only one part of Alina's perfect life. She also had David Cross, the husband she loved with her entire heart. David was a successful attorney at one of Boston's top law firms. They met at a charity fundraiser when Alina was in her final year of medical school, and David was captivated from the very first moment. He often said that when he saw Alina standing in that crowd, everything else faded away, leaving only her warm brown eyes and a smile like sunlight. They dated for 2 years before David proposed on a mountaintop after a long climb, and Alina cried with joy as she said yes. Their wedding was not extravagant, but it overflowed with love, surrounded by close family and friends, sealed with sincere vows they honored every single day. 3 years later, Alina gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. Lily was born exactly 3 minutes before no, and the moment Alina held the 2 tiny lives in her arms, she knew her world was complete. Lily had her mother's eyes, warm brown and bright like stars, while No inherited his father's radiant smile. By the age of 4, Lily had already shown a strong and determined personality. She loved pink, adored dolls, and proudly declared she would become a doctor like her mother to save everyone. No was different, quieter, fascinated by books about dinosaurs, able to name every species with astonishing accuracy. He wanted to be a doctor too, but a doctor for dinosaurs, even though Alina had explained many times that dinosaurs had gone extinct long ago. Their family lived in a cozy mansion on Beacon Hill, not large but filled with laughter and love. Every morning, no matter how busy she was, Alina woke early to prepare breakfast, kissed her husband and children before leaving for work. Every evening, despite the exhaustion of long surgeries, she always made time to read to Lily and No before bed. David often joked that he must have saved the world in a past life to be rewarded with her as his wife in this one, and Alina always replied that she was the lucky one, lucky to have him, to have 2 little angels, to have everything a woman could dream of. On the final night before everything collapsed, Alina came home later than usual after a complex surgery. She had saved a terminal brain cancer patient everyone else said had no hope. When she entered the house, David was waiting on the sofa with a glass of red wine, and the children were already asleep in their rooms. "My hero," as David said with a tender smile. Alina sat beside him, resting her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar warmth and the masculine scent she loved. "I am so tired," she whispered, "but I am so happy too. I have you, I have Lily, I have No. I do not think life can be more perfect than this." David kissed her forehead and said everything would only get better, that they would grow old together, watch their children grow, and live happily ever after. Alina believed. She believed in the bright future they had painted together. She did not know it was the last night she would have everything, and that within a few short hours, fate would steal away all she loved, leaving nothing behind but ashes and tears. That fateful night arrived without warning, the way death always does, silent and merciless, when Alina accepted an overnight emergency shift at the hospital for a critical transfer, a 12-year-old girl with a brain tumor who needed immediate surgery, and the operation lasted 12 hours, from 8 in the evening until 8 the following morning, with Alina fighting death second by second to pull the child back from the edge. And when she placed the final stitch and saw the monitor settle into a steady heartbeat, she released a breath she did not realize she had been holding and offered a weary smile to the nurses. Another life saved. Then she removed her gloves, stepped out of the operating room, and reached for her phone in the locker, and at 3 in the morning she saw 23 missed calls from an unknown number, and 5 voicemail messages, her heart accelerating as she pressed play on the first message. "This is the Boston Fire Department," an urgent voice said. "We need to reach Alina Cross immediately. Your home in Beacon Hill is on fire. Please call back at once." And the world stopped. Alina stood frozen in the hospital corridor, the phone nearly slipping from her hand. No, it could not be true. She had spoken to David just hours earlier. He had wished her success and told her the children were sleeping peacefully. Everything was fine. Everything had to be fine. She ran to the parking lot, her hands shaking so badly she could barely unlock the car, and she drove through the empty Boston streets like a madwoman, running red lights, weaving through the few vehicles on the road, whispering prayers without stopping. "Please God, let them be safe. Please let David and the children be safe. I will do anything, please God." But when she turned onto her familiar street, her heart shattered into a million pieces. Her house, her home, the place that held all her love and hope, was now nothing more than a smoking ruin. The flames had been extinguished, but what remained was only the blackened skeleton of the mansion, collapsed walls, a burned-out roof, and the stench of ash that hit her like a physical blow. Fire trucks and police cars still surrounded the site, red and blue lights flashing like the indifferent eyes of fate. Alina leapt from the car and ran toward the wreckage, but a firefighter stopped her. "You cannot go in there," he said quietly. "It is dangerous, my husband," Alina screamed, her voice breaking into sobs. "My children, Lily and No, where are they, where are they?" And the firefighter looked at her with an expression Alina would never forget, the look of hopeless compassion, the look of someone delivering the worst news a human being can hear. "I am so sorry," he said softly. "When we arrived the fire had spread too fast. Your husband tried to get the children out, but they did not make it. All 3 died from smoke inhalation before we could reach them." "No," Alina shook her head, refusing to accept the words. "No, you are wrong. David is strong. He would protect them. He promised me. He promised he would always protect them." She struggled against the firefighter's grip, trying to run into the ruins to find her family, as if finding them could somehow save them, could pull them back from death with the same hands that had saved so many strangers. But she could not save the ones she loved most. She had not been there when they needed her. She had been saving another child while her own children were dying in the flames. 2 police officers had to restrain Alina as she screamed like a wounded animal, clawing at the air, reaching toward the house that was no longer a home, screaming David's name, Lily's name, Nully's name, until her throat tore and her voice dissolved into hoarse, meaningless sounds, and she collapsed at the scene, her body unable to bear the weight of the pain her soul was carrying. When she woke in the hospital, she prayed it had only been a nightmare. But the tear-soaked face of the nurse and the condolences of her colleagues confirmed that hell was real, and she was living in it. 3 days later came the funeral. Alina stood in the cemetery dressed in black, watching 3 coffins lowered into the ground, 1 large and 2 heartbreakingly small, and she could no longer cry. The tears were gone, leaving only an endless hollow inside her. David, the man who promised to stay with her forever. Lily, her little princess who dreamed of becoming a doctor like her mother. No, the boy who loved dinosaurs and smiled exactly like his father. They lay there in cold wooden boxes, about to be swallowed by dark earth, and Alina could do nothing to stop it. She wanted to jump in after them, to lie beside her husband and children and let the soil cover her too. She did not want to live in a world without them, but someone held her back and she was too weak to fight. They told her the fire was caused by an electrical fault in the old wiring. An accident, just a terrible accident no one could have foreseen. But to Alina it was not an accident, it was punishment. Punishment for having been too greedy, for having too much happiness, for daring to believe her life was perfect, and fate had taught her that nothing lasts forever, especially the things she loves most. 6 months after the funeral, Alina forced herself to rise from the ashes of her shattered life, returning to the hospital not because she wanted to live, but because she did not know what else to do, because work was the only thing that could momentarily silence the faces of David, Lily and No that haunted every one of her dreams, and she worked 16 hours a day, taking every surgery no one else wanted, as if saving other lives could somehow atone for the fact that she had failed to save her own family, while colleagues watched her with growing concern, whispering behind her back that Dr. Cross was destroying herself, that she needed rest, that she needed therapy. But Alina did not listen, because she was terrified that the moment she stopped, the darkness would rush in and swallow her whole, and she feared she would never escape it. Then came the surgery that sealed her fate. The patient was Senator Richard Harrison, a powerful 62-year-old man with an aggressive malignant brain tumor, and his family specifically demanded Dr. Alina Cross because of her reputation. even after Alina warned them of every possible risk. The operation is extremely complex, she told the senator's wife and son. The tumor is in a dangerous location near major blood vessels. There is a high risk of complications, but they insisted on proceeding, and Alina did everything within her power. The surgery lasted 14 hours. She fought millimeter by millimeter, carefully navigating every nerve and critical vessel, but in the 12th hour, a tiny blood vessel that no test had detected beforehand ruptured without warning. Alina fought desperately to stop the bleeding, but the patient's blood pressure plummeted, and his heart stopped on the operating table. They attempted resuscitation for 45 minutes, but Senator Harrison did not survive. Alina stepped out of the operating room with trembling hands and had to tell the family she had failed. She was no stranger to losing patients. It was the cruel reality of medicine, but she never grew accustomed to the eyes of loved ones hearing that someone they cherished was gone. The senator's wife collapsed in tears, but his son, a young lawyer named William Harrison, stared at Alina with eyes as cold as ice. "You will pay for this," he said flatly. "You killed my..." 3 weeks later, Alina was arrested on charges of medical negligence resulting in death. She could not believe what was happening as police read the warrant and handcuffed her in the middle of the hospital corridor, in front of dozens of colleagues and patients. They claimed witnesses said she had been drinking before the surgery, that she had skipped safety protocols, that she had been reckless and careless. All of it. Alina had never taken a single drop of alcohol before surgery in her entire career. But the head operating room nurse, a woman who had worked beside her for years, stood in court and falsely testified that she had seen Alina drinking whiskey in the staff lounge 30 minutes before the operation. The trial was a perfectly staged performance. The Harrison family had money and power, and they used both to crush her. Alina's defense attorney, appointed because she could no longer afford legal counsel after her assets were frozen, was helpless against the expensive legal team of the prosecution. The jury took only 4 hours to return a verdict guilty. Alina was sentenced to 2 years in prison and permanently stripped of her medical license. She stood in the courtroom hearing the sentence as if it came from another world, realizing that fate had not yet finished tormenting her. The federal women's prison was a version of hell Alina had never imagined. On her very first day, when other inmates learned she had once been a wealthy doctor from Boston, they looked at her like prey. "Rich girls like you do not belong here," a large tattooed woman sneered, grabbing Alina by the hair and slamming her face into the wall. "But do not worry, we will teach you how to survive." That night, Alina was dragged into a dark corner of the cell block and beaten by 5 women. They punched her face, kicked her stomach, yanked her hair, and threw her onto the freezing concrete like a discarded rag doll. She screamed for help, but the guards stood outside watching with bored indifference. No. The worst happened in the 3rd month. One night, Alina was pulled from her bed and dragged to a storage shed behind the facility where there were no cameras. There she was raped by a group of inmates who tortured her for hours while she screamed until her voice was gone. When they left, Alina lay on the cold cement floor, her body broken and bleeding, her soul completely dead. She was no longer Dr. Alina Cross. She was an empty shell, an object discarded without a second glance. 1 week later, Alina attempted suicide for the first time. She shattered the plastic mirror in the bathroom and used the shards to slash her wrists, cutting so deep she could see bone, the warm blood flowing out, and for the first time in months, she felt peace. But another inmate found her and called the guards, and Alina was taken to the infirmary, stitched up, and thrown back into her cell as if nothing had happened. The second time, she hanged herself with a bedsheet in the bathroom. She had already lost consciousness when guards found her, her lips blue, her heart barely beating. They saved her life not because they cared, but because an inmate dying would create too much paperwork. Alina begged to be allowed to die, but even death refused to take her. 2 years in hell finally came to an end, and Alina stepped out through the prison gates on a gray winter morning with nothing but the clothes on her back, $20 in release money, and a soul that had died long ago, standing there staring at the empty road ahead and realizing she had nowhere to go, because no one was waiting for her and she no longer had a home to return to. The first thing Alina did after her release was call her parents, for during those 2 years she had been forbidden from contacting anyone, and every night she had thought of them, wondering how they were, wondering whether they could still love her after everything that had happened. But when she dialed the familiar number, a stranger's voice answered, and when she asked for Robert and Mary Bennett, her parents, the man on the line fell silent before telling her they had passed away more than a year earlier, and Alina stood in a public phone booth with the receiver trembling in her hand as the world collapsed around her once again, even though she had believed there was nothing left to lose. She sought out her parents' old neighbors and learned the rest of the story, that her father Robert Bennett had suffered a fatal stroke upon hearing that his daughter had been sentenced to prison, unable to bear the shame and grief, and that her mother Mary Bennett had tried to go on after her husband's death but had slowly unraveled, refusing to eat or sleep, sitting by the window calling Alina's name every day until she died in her sleep 6 months later, and people said her heart had simply broken. Alina realized she had killed both her parents without ever lifting a hand, that her existence, her choices, her fate had taken the lives of the people who loved her most, and now she truly had no one left in this world. She went to a law office to ask about her assets, and was told that what wasn't drained by her exorbitant legal defense fees had been seized to compensate the family of Senator Harrison under the court's ruling, and she walked out with empty hands, literally owning nothing but the clothes she wore and $15 left in her pocket. Alina tried to find work, but everywhere rejected her when they saw the criminal record, calling her a killer, a careless doctor who had killed a patient, and no one would hire her, not even for the simplest jobs like washing dishes or sweeping floors, because the name Alina Cross had become a stain no one wanted to touch. Day by day, the little money she had disappeared. She slept in cheap motels until she could no longer pay, then in homeless shelters until she was expelled for breaking the rules, and eventually she found herself beneath a bridge in South Boston among society's discarded souls, realizing this was where she belonged. She began to drink cheap bottles bought with spare change begged from passers-by, becoming her only companions, because alcohol helped her forget David's face, forget the laughter of Lily and No, forget the nights of abuse in prison, forget who she once was and everything she had lost, drinking until memory dissolved and the world became a painless blur. Many nights, Alina stood on the edge of the bridge staring down at the black water below, thinking about jumping, knowing that one step, one moment of courage, would end everything, that she would see David, Lily, and No again, that she could apologize to her parents, that she would no longer have to endure anything. Yet every time she stood there she could not move forward, not because she wanted to live, but because she feared that even death would reject her again, just as it had twice before in prison. 2 years passed beneath that bridge, and Alina no longer remembered that she had once been a doctor, that she had saved hundreds of lives, that she had once had a loving family and a bright future, because she was now nothing more than a breathing corpse surviving on discarded food and cheap alcohol, having long ago abandoned hope, abandoned dreams, even abandoned prayer, knowing no one was listening. Until that night, the night 3 gleaming black Maybachs stopped beneath the bridge, and a man feared by all of Boston stepped out and looked straight at her as if she were the most important person in the world. Now we understand why Alina did not run when Dominic Vale approached her, because she had nothing left to lose, not even her life, and perhaps, deep within the darkest corner of her dead heart, she was still waiting for a miracle she no longer believed could be real. The following morning at the Vale estate, Alina woke in the lavish room and needed a few seconds to remember where she was, sunlight filtering through the velvet curtains, warm and gentle, so unlike the bone-cutting cold beneath the bridge she had grown used to over the past 2 years, and she sat up, looked down at the diamond ring still on her finger, and wondered if she was dreaming, yet the dull ache in her weakened body and the faint lavender scent of the silk sheets reminded her this was real, a reality she did not understand and did not dare believe. Alina did not want to remain in the room like a prisoner, even a prisoner in a gilded cage, so she dressed in the simple clothes prepared in the wardrobe, a cream-colored cashmere sweater and soft trousers, and quietly stepped into the corridor. The mansion was eerily silent, her footsteps echoing against the marble floor as she walked along the endless hall, taking in the oil paintings on the walls and the fresh flower arrangements placed with meticulous care, as if an invisible army maintained the perfection of the place. She did not know where she was going, letting her feet guide her, until she stopped before a partially open wooden door from which soft light and the scent of old paper drifted out. It was a library, a room lined with shelves stretching from floor to ceiling, a sliding wooden ladder to reach the upper volumes, and leather armchairs set beside a fireplace. But what stopped Alina was not the books or the luxury, it was the boy sitting alone at a wooden table near the window. Marcus, 8 years old, with black hair and gray eyes identical to his father's, was bent over a sheet of paper, a pencil moving slowly and precisely in his hand. He did not look up when Alina entered, did not react to her presence at all, as if she were an invisible ghost. Alina stood at the doorway for a moment, watching him, and something about Marcus made her heart ache with a familiar pain. He sat there alone and silent, the same way she had sat alone and silent beneath the bridge for 2 years. She recognized in him a reflection of herself, a wounded soul hiding from the world. Alina approached softly, not wanting to startle him, and sat in a chair a few steps away, close enough to see what he was drawing, far enough not to invade his space, and when she saw the image forming beneath his hand, her breath caught in her throat. He was drawing a human heart, not the symbolic shape children usually draw, but an anatomical heart with 4 chambers, valves, the aorta, the pulmonary veins, all rendered with astonishing accuracy. Tiny vessels branched from the myocardium like a spider's web, drawn with such care that Alina could clearly identify the left ventricle, the right atrium, the mitral valve. This 8-year-old child was creating a drawing many first-year medical students could not produce correctly. Alina said. She simply sat there, breathing evenly, understanding instinctively that Marcus did not need conversation, did not need questions or forced connection. He had encountered too many people like that already, therapists trying to make him speak, adults trying to fix him as if he were something broken. Alina did not try to fix anyone. She no longer had the strength to fix even herself. She simply remained there present, asking nothing. 10 minutes. 20 minutes. Alina gazed out the window at the perfectly manicured garden and let her mind empty, unaware that Marcus had glanced at her, a quick and subtle look, the first time in many years the boy had chosen to look at a stranger. He looked at her for a single second, then returned to his drawing, but something in the air had shifted. The invisible tension surrounding Marcus seemed to ease slightly, as if he sensed that this woman was not a threat, not another adult who would try to force him into something he did not want. Standing outside the library door, Dominic Vale watched everything in silence. He had been there since Alina entered, hidden in the shadows of the corridor, observing her every movement. He saw her sit beside Marcus, saw her say nothing, do nothing, simply exist, and he witnessed what dozens of the world's most expensive specialists had failed to achieve over 5 years. Marcus had looked at her. His son, the child who refused to look at anyone beyond familiar servants, had chosen to glance at a stranger. Dominic's gray eyes, usually cold as ice, held something different now, not softness, he did not allow himself softness, but a spark of hope he had buried long ago. Perhaps he had been right to place his bet on this woman. Perhaps Alina Cross, the woman who had lost everything, was the only one who could reach the son he had never known how to touch. News of Dominic Vale proposing to a homeless woman beneath a bridge spread through the underworld like wildfire. Videos filmed by the homeless crowd that night passing from one phone to another, from one Mafia family to the next, until within 48 hours the entire Northeast criminal world knew, and in pitch-dark rooms where duns convened, in luxurious nightclubs where dirty money was laundered, in discreet restaurants where illicit deals were sealed, there was only one topic of conversation: Dominic Vale had lost his mind. Don Salvatore of the Russo family in Providence laughed loudly as he watched the footage, saying the Vale boy had finally revealed his weakness, while the O'Brien family in South Boston, who had feared the Vale family for decades, whispered that perhaps it was time for the balance of power to shift, and even Vale's allies, families who had sworn loyalty and prospered under Dominic's protection, began exchanging uneasy glances, wondering whether they should continue betting on a man who appeared to have sacrificed reason for a beggar. No one, however, was more pleased than Lorenzo Marchetti. In a lavish penthouse on the 17th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, Lorenzo watched the video for the 10th time, a predatory smile fixed on his lips. The New York Mafia boss, who had long dreamed of swallowing Boston whole but had never found an opening, now saw light at the end of the tunnel. Lorenzo Marchetti, 45 years old, was dangerously handsome with slicked-back salt and pepper hair and eyes as dark as burning coal. He was known to be even more brutal than Dominic, but without his rival's restraint or calculation. Lorenzo killed for pleasure, tortured for enjoyment, and there was no moral boundary he would not cross. He had wanted Boston for 10 years, but the Vale family was too strong and Dominic too terrifying. Dominic had a weakness. Call our people in Boston, Lorenzo ordered his right hand. Find out everything about that girl. Who she is, where she comes from, what her past looks like. Find anything that can be used. And watch her. I want to know where she goes, who she meets, what she eats. Miss Na. Meanwhile, at Vale Estate, another confrontation was unfolding. Victor Vale, 62 years old, hair white as snow but his back still rigid as steel, stormed into his son's study without knocking. Though retired and having handed the empire to Dominic, Victor still wielded invisible authority within the family, and today he had come to exercise it. Have you lost your mind? Victor roared, his voice echoing through the vast room. Marrying a homeless woman dragged out from under a bridge. Do you have any idea the whole world is laughing at us? Dominic sat behind his desk, not rising, not showing fear. He had stopped fearing his father long ago, from the day he realized he could be more ruthless than Victor if necessary. This is my decision, Dominic replied, his voice cold and even. It has nothing to do with you. Victor slammed his hand on the desk, rattling the lamp. Nothing to do with. You are the boss of the Vale family. Everything you do concerns the family, concerns the empire I built over 40 years. Do you think the Marchettis will stand by? Do you think our allies will continue to respect a man who marries a woman from the gutter? Dominic stood slowly and stepped in front of his father. He was half a head taller than Victor, and when his storm-gray eyes looked down at the man who had raised him with violence, there was no reverence there, only pure coldness. Do you know why I need Alina? Dominic asked, his voice low and dangerous. Because, my son, you're the child who has not spoken a single word for 5 years since his mother, Victoria, abandoned him because the damage was too deep. This morning he looked at Alina. For the first time in 5 years, Marcus chose to look at a stranger. Victor fell silent, the fury in his eyes briefly replaced by shock. Dominic continued, his tone unyielding. I do not care what the world thinks. I do not care what the Marchettis or any other family thinks. I will do anything to save my son, even marry a homeless woman, even burn all of Boston to ashes if I have to. And if anyone disagrees, he stepped closer, his voice dropping into a predator's growl, including you, they can leave the Vale family. I do not need anyone's approval. Victor stared at his son for a long moment, as if looking at a stranger, then turned and walked out without another word. He knew when to retreat. Dominic was no longer the trembling boy forced to watch his father torture enemies in the basement. His son had become a monster even more terrifying than himself, and for the first time Victor did not know whether that was something to be proud of or afraid of. After his father left, Dominic returned to his desk and pressed the button to summon Raffle, his most loyal right hand. Increase security around the estate, he ordered, and monitor any unusual movement from the Marchettis. I do not believe they will remain still. Raffle nodded, but before leaving, he hesitated and asked quietly whether Dominic was truly certain about this decision. Dominic looked out the window, where he could see the garden below, and within it a slender figure walking among the flower beds, Elena, standing there in the sunlight, and for the first time in years he felt something other than emptiness. I have never been more certain, Dominic replied. The days that followed unfolded in a strange rhythm Elena had never expected. Each morning she woke in the luxurious room, still unable to believe she was here, still waiting for someone to come and tell her it had all been a cruel joke. Yet that moment never arrived, and instead she found herself drawn into a new routine, one that revolved around the silent 8-year-old boy in the library. Elena did not try to talk to Marcus. She had once been a doctor, had seen children broken by trauma, and she understood that forcing words would only deepen the wounds, so instead she simply appeared. Every day, around 9 in the morning, she walked into the library and sat in the familiar chair a few steps away from Marcus. She did not speak, did not look at him directly, did nothing that might make him feel invaded. She simply existed, present, quiet, harmless. On the third day, Elena brought a medical book with her, one she had found in the mansion's library, an anatomy volume filled with detailed illustrations of the human body, and she opened it and began to read, not aloud, but turning the pages slowly, letting images of the heart, the lungs, the brain, the bones reveal themselves. And though she did not look at Marcus, she knew he was glancing over. She could feel his curiosity settle on the pages each time she turned one. On the 5th day, Marcus sat a little closer, not much, perhaps half a meter, but it was a monumental step. On the 7th day, he pulled his chair beside Elena, close enough to see the illustrations clearly, and she still said nothing, only turned the pages a little more slowly so he could study them. On the 10th day, Elena began to whisper explanations, not speaking to Marcus, but as if speaking to herself. This is the Orda, she murmured, her finger resting lightly on the drawing. It carries oxygen-rich blood from the heart to the rest of the body. And this is the vena cava, returning oxygen-poor blood to the heart, 2 perfect systems, working without rest from the moment we are born until the moment we die. Marcus did not respond, but he tilted his head, eyes fixed on the page, and Elena knew he was listening to every word. On the afternoon of the 12th day, everything changed. Marcus was drawing as usual, this time the central nervous system with the brain and spinal cord, when his hand slipped and the small utility blade he used to sharpen his pencil sliced a long cut across his index finger. Bright red blood welled up and dripped onto the unfinished drawing. The boy did not cry, did not scream, he simply sat there watching his finger bleed with an empty expression, as if physical pain no longer held meaning for him. Elena reacted. The instinct of a doctor buried for years surged awake as though it had never slept. She stepped to Marcus's side and gently took his hand. "Let me see," she said, her voice calm and soft, the same voice she had once used with hundreds of young patients. She examined the wound quickly and professionally. The cut was fairly deep but had not reached any tendon or major vessel. It needed cleaning and a bandage, not stitches. "Wait just a moment," Elena said, then glanced around the room and spotted a small first aid kit on a bookshelf, likely kept for emergencies. She retrieved it, returned to Marcus, and began to work. She had done this thousands of times before. Her hands moved naturally, wiping away blood with sterile gauze, applying antiseptic, wrapping the bandage snugly but gently around his finger. Throughout it all, she spoke softly, not expecting an answer, but letting him know she was there, that she would take care of him. "It is just a small cut," she said. "It will heal in a few days. I know you like to draw, so I wrapped it carefully so you can still hold your pencil. It is all right. Everything will be fine." She tied the final knot and lifted her eyes to Marcus, about to say it was finished, but the words caught in her throat when she saw his gray eyes looking straight at her. Not the quick glance of the days before, but a true look, deep and searching, as if he were looking for something in her face. Then Marcus opened his mouth. "It does not hurt." The words emerged rough and faint, barely more than a whisper, as if his voice had forgotten how to exist after 5 years of silence. Yet they were words, the first words Marcus had spoken to anyone since the desperate cries for his mother the night she left. Elena froze, afraid to breathe, afraid any movement might shatter the fragile moment. Her eyes burned, tears threatening to spill, but she held them back. She did not want to cry in front of him, did not want him to think she was sad or disappointed. "It does not hurt," she repeated softly, her voice trembling. "That is wonderful. You are very brave." Marcus did not say anything more, but he did not turn away either. He looked at Elena for a few seconds longer, then lowered his gaze to the bandaged finger, and something flickered in his gray eyes. Not a smile, he was not ready for that yet, but a softening, a fragile thread of trust, delicate as the first wing beat of a butterfly. Outside the library door, Dominic Vale leaned against the wall, his hand clenched into a fist, not from anger, but from the overwhelming surge of emotion in his chest. He had heard it. It does not hurt. His son. After 5 years of silence, after dozens of failed specialists, it had taken only one woman lifted from beneath a bridge, a doctor who had lost everything, who had sat quietly beside Marcus each day asking nothing, and the boy had opened his mouth. Dominic tilted his face toward the ceiling and closed his eyes, and for the first time in many years, he felt a tear slide down his cheek. He did not wipe it. No one saw, and even a monster is allowed to cry when his son begins to return to the world. That night the nightmare returned as it always had for 4 years, unforgiving, relentless, never allowing her rest, and Elena found herself standing before the house on Beacon Hill, flames raging wildly, licking the night sky like the tongues of starving demons. She heard screams from inside, David calling her name, Lily and Noah crying for their mother to save them. She tried to run toward the house, but her legs would not move. She tried to scream, but no sound came from her throat, and she could only stand there, powerless, watching the house collapse and swallow everyone she loved. Then David stepped out of the sea of fire. His flesh burned black, Lily and Noah in his arms, their small bodies also aflame, and he looked at her with hollow eyes and asked why she did not save them, why she was not at home, and Elena jolted awake with a scream, her nightclothes soaked with sweat, her heart pounding as if it would tear itself from her chest. She did not know where she was. The darkness around her felt like a prison, like the bridge, like every terrible place she had ever lived. She curled in on herself on the bed, clutching her head, and began to cry, desperate sobs echoing through the vast room. She did not hear the door open, did not realize anyone had entered until she felt the mattress sink beside her and a familiar warmth spread from the person sitting close. Elena lifted her head through blurred tears and saw Dominic there. He said nothing, did not touch her at first, did not try to comfort her with empty words. He simply sat beside her in simple black sleepwear, his hair slightly disheveled as if he had been woken, and looked at her with gray eyes free of judgment. They sat in silence for a long time, with only Elena's ragged breathing and the night wind outside the window. Then, like a dam breaking after years of pressure, Elena began to speak. She whispered that she had a husband, that his name was David, that he was a lawyer who hated arguments and always apologized first even when she was at fault, that he was terrible at cooking but tried to make her breakfast every weekend, that he told her she was the best thing that had ever happened to him. And Dominic said nothing and listened. She went on trembling that she had 2 children, twins, Lily and Noah 4 years old, that Lily loved pink and wanted to be a doctor like her mother, that Noah loved dinosaurs and could name hundreds of species, that every night they made her read them and Noah always begged for one more chapter, even when it was late. Tears streamed down her face, but she did not stop. She told him that night she had been in surgery, operating on a 12-year-old girl with a brain tumor, that she saved that child, but while she saved someone else's daughter her own house burned, that David tried to get the children out but did not make it, that all 3 died from smoke inhalation, and she choked that she was not even there to say goodbye. She bowed her head, her shoulders shaking, saying she was a doctor who had saved hundreds of lives, but could not save her own family, that she was not there when they needed her, that she had failed them and killed them. And Dominic remained silent. He did not tell her it was not her fault, did not offer the hollow reassurances she had heard too many times. He only lifted his hand slowly and gently and rested it on her shoulder, a small gesture yet the first true connection between them, not out of obligation or performance but to let her know she was no longer alone. And for the first time in years Elena truly cried, not the silent tears of the night, not the muffled sobs held back in fear of being heard, but the crying of a child, crying for everything she had lost, for the husband she loved, for the children she adored, for parents who died because of her, for a career stolen, for years of hell in prison, for 2 years living like a ghost beneath a bridge. She cried and Dominic stayed there with his hand on her shoulder, saying nothing, simply being there, until he finally spoke softly that he too had ghosts, that he did not know how to talk about them, but that he understood what it meant to be shattered from within. And Elena looked up at him with swollen, reddened eyes and in the pale moonlight saw something in Dominic's gray gaze, a hidden pain, a loneliness like her own, 2 broken souls, 2 people who had lost everything, somehow finding each other in the dark. And she whispered that she was so lonely, and Dominic answered that he was too, and from that night something shifted between them. Not love, not yet, but understanding, the recognition that after being thrown into the abyss by life, they no longer had to fall alone. In the days that followed that night, everything inside the Vale estate began to change in ways no one could have predicted, as Marcus started to speak more, not long conversations, but single words and short sentences slipping from his lips like small flowers blooming after a long and brutal winter, asking Elena about the heart, about the brain, about how blood moves through the body, pointing at his drawings and asking what this was, whether that was correct, why veins were blue and arteries red, and Elena answered each question patiently, her voice gentle in the same way it once had been with Lily and Noah. And every time Marcus nodded in understanding she felt a small broken piece inside her heart begin to mend. One afternoon Marcus looked up at her with a seriousness far beyond his 8 years and said that he wanted to be a doctor, then asked if she could teach him. And the question caught in Alina's throat as she remembered Lily and her dream of becoming a doctor, a dream buried beneath the ashes of the house on Beacon Hill. Yet now another child stood before her with the same hope in his eyes, and she realized this might be a way to continue what had been lost, so she told him she would teach him everything she knew, her voice trembling softly. From then on they spent hours together each day, Alina bringing simpler medical books, drawing diagrams to explain how organs worked, telling stories of surgeries she once performed, while Marcus listened with rapt attention and sometimes redrew what she explained with astonishing precision, like a parched sponge absorbing every drop of knowledge, and Alina felt herself slowly come back to life through his curiosity. Dominic watched it all from a distance, seeing the way Alina sat beside his son, the way Marcus gradually opened to her, the small fleeting smiles that appeared on the boy's face for the first time in many years. And though Dominic wanted to step closer and be part of those moments, he did not know how, having spent his life learning how to kill, how to dominate, how to inspire fear, but never how to be a father, never how to reach the child he loved more than anything. Until one evening, when Alina sat in the library reviewing a book on the nervous system in preparation for the next day's lesson, and felt a small tug at her sleeve, turning to see Marcus standing there with a strange determination in his gray eyes as he told her to come with him, then before she could ask where, he took her hand and pulled her from the chair, his small hand warm and tight in hers as if afraid she might disappear if he let go, leading her down the long corridors, up the stairs, and to the door of Dominic's study, which Marcus pushed open as he pulled Alina inside. Dominic sat behind his desk reviewing papers and looked up in surprise at the sight of his son and Alina, and Marcus, his voice shaking slightly as if gathering all his courage, told his father that he wanted them to have dinner together, freezing Dominic in place as he stared at the child who had not spoken to him for 5 years. Now standing there holding Alina's hand and asking for a family dinner as if it were the most natural thing in the world. And when Marcus asked again, a little louder, Dominic swallowed hard and answered that he heard him and would come right away. That night they ate dinner in the large dining room, but not at the long table meant for lavish banquets. Instead, Dominic ordered a small table set by the window for just the 3 of them, and they sat there, Alina, Dominic, and Marcus, sharing a meal like an ordinary family, Marcus seated between them, glancing now at Alina and now at his father as if making sure both were still there, speaking little but finishing all the food on his plate. Something the staff later told Dominic had not happened in a very long time, and at the end of the meal when dessert was served, Marcus did something that took both adults' breath away. He smiled. Just a small fleeting smile, quick as lightning, but it was the first smile Marcus had given in 5 years, and Alina looked at Dominic and for the first time saw something in the storm-gray eyes of the feared Mafia boss other than coldness, as he gazed at his son with pure and overwhelming love. The love of a father who had waited through years of despair for this moment. This is family, Alina realized then, imperfect, stitched together from broken pieces, built on pain and loss, yet still family, and for the first time in 4 years she felt that she truly belonged somewhere. While a fragile happiness was beginning to take root inside the Vale estate, darkness was gathering on the other side, and in a Manhattan penthouse Lorenzo Marchetti sat back in an expensive leather chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, his eyes fixed on a thick stack of files spread across the desk, because for 3 weeks his men had followed Alina step by step, collecting every piece of information they could about the mysterious woman Dominic Vale had taken from beneath a bridge, and what they uncovered surprised him. Interesting, Lorenzo murmured as he flipped through the pages. Dr. Alina Cross, neurosurgeon at Massachusetts General Hospital, valedictorian of Harvard Medical School, a medical prodigy, and he kept reading about the house fire that killed her husband and 2 children, about the false charges, the 2 years in prison, the fall from the very peak to the bottom of the abyss, and a predatory smile slowly curved his lips as the full picture emerged. So Dominic's little bird is not a nobody after all, he said to the right hand standing beside him. She used to be someone, and now she is Vale's fatal weakness. Marco nodded and added that according to their source inside the Vale estate, she had made the boy Marcus speak again and Dominic treated her like a priceless treasure. Lorenzo set his glass down, his dark eyes gleaming with ambition. Perfect. Because he had wanted Boston for 10 years, but the Vale family was too strong and Dominic too frightening, and a direct attack would be suicide, yet now Dominic had a weakness, one that could be exploited. If we take her, Lorenzo calculated, Dominic will be forced to choose between her and his empire, and either way we win. If he gives up territory to save her, Boston is ours. If he refuses, we kill her and his spirit collapses, and in both cases Vale weakens, and we devour everything. When Marco asked for specifics, Lorenzo laid out every detail with the precision of an experienced predator, knowing the Vale estate could not be attacked directly, protected like a fortress with dozens of guards and advanced security, so he would wait for an opportunity when Alina left the estate, when she was less protected, and he needed an insider, something money could easily buy. Find someone inside the estate, Lorenzo ordered, a servant, a cook, a driver, anyone, pay whatever it takes. I need to know when she leaves and where she goes. 3 days later Marco returned with good news. They had found a middle-aged servant drowning in gambling debts. But money wasn't enough. Marco had shown the man photos of his daughter walking to school, making it clear that her life depended on his cooperation. Terrified and trapped, the servant agreed to act as an informant, reporting that Alina occasionally asked permission to go out to buy books for Marcus and that next time she did, he would alert them immediately. Lorenzo nodded in satisfaction, moved 20 of his most lethal gunmen from New York to Boston, hid them in an abandoned warehouse in Quincy on the outskirts of the city, and finalized every aspect of the plan, from neutralizing Alina's guards to escape routes, from the holding location to the negotiation scenario with Dominic. Everything flawless. All that remained was to wait. Meanwhile, inside the Vale estate, Alina had no idea danger was closing in. She only knew that her life was slowly becoming bearable again, that Marcus needed her, that perhaps she had found a reason to continue existing, and one morning while teaching Marcus about the circulatory system, she realized she had run out of medical books suited to his level. She needed more, books with clearer illustrations, easier to understand, so the boy could keep learning. She went to Dominic's study and asked permission to go out, and Dominic hesitated, the instincts of a mafia boss warning him about the world beyond the estate's walls. But when Alina said she could not live forever in a gilded cage, that she needed air, needed the feeling of freedom even for a few hours, he could not bring himself to refuse. "All right," he said, "but 2 guards will go with you. They do not take their eyes off you for a second," and Alina agreed, thanked him with a faint smile, and turned to prepare, unaware of the worry in Dominic's gaze as he watched her leave, unaware of the orders he quietly gave Raffle to heighten alertness, and completely unaware that the moment she stepped out of the room, the traitorous servant slipped away to make a call to Marco, reporting that the prey was about to leave the cage. Lorenzo Marchetti received the message and smiled. "Get ready," he ordered. "The little bird is about to fly out of the nest." That morning Alina stepped out of the Vale estate with a sense of lightness she had forgotten existed. The warm spring sunlight touching her pale skin, a gentle breeze carrying the scent of flowers from the garden brushing past her senses, and for the first time in years she felt like an ordinary person rather than a ghost or a prisoner, with 2 bodyguards accompanying her, one driving and one seated beside her, both large men armed but careful to keep enough distance that she did not feel confined. The black SUV took her to a medical bookstore in downtown Boston, a small shop catering to students and medical professionals that she used to frequent during her working years, and as she stepped inside, the familiar smell of old paper and new books wrapped around her, awakening a part of herself she thought was long dead. She spent nearly an hour moving along the shelves, selecting anatomy books with clearer illustrations, volumes on the circulatory and nervous systems written in ways accessible to beginners, thinking of Marcus and the eager light in his eyes whenever he learned something new, a natural smile forming on her lips. The 2 guards waited outside, scanning the street, unaware that they themselves were being watched from 3 vans parked at intervals around the area. When Alina stepped out of the bookstore carrying her bag of books, everything happened too fast for her to react. 2 suppressed gunshots cracked like muted coughs, and her guards collapsed onto the pavement before they could draw their weapons. Alina opened her mouth to scream, but a large hand clamped over it from behind while another arm wrapped tightly around her waist and lifted her off the ground. She struggled, kicked, tried to bite the hand covering her mouth, but her attacker was far stronger. A van rolled up, its door sliding open, and Alina was thrown inside like a sack of grain, and before she could cry out for help, a fist slammed into her temple and the world went black. 2 hours later, Dominic sat in his study reviewing financial reports for a real estate project when his phone vibrated with a message from an unknown number. He opened it and saw a video link, and though the instincts of a mafia boss warned him, he pressed it anyway, and the blood in his veins turned to ice. Alina appeared on the screen, tied to a wooden chair in the center of a dark, damp room, her face bruised, a streak of blood at the corner of her mouth, her hair tangled and stuck to her forehead. She lifted her head toward the camera, her eyes still unfocused from the blow, and Dominic saw fear there, but also the same resilience and refusal to break he had recognized from the first night beneath the bridge. Then another face stepped into view, a face Dominic knew and hated to his core. Lorenzo. "Hello, Dominic," Lorenzo said with a cruel smile. "I hope you are having a pleasant day. As you can see, I am holding something very precious to you." He moved behind Alina and rested a hand on her shoulder, and she flinched at his touch. Dominic's grip tightened around the phone until the casing creaked. "She is quite beautiful," Lorenzo continued mockingly. "I can see why you are so captivated. A gifted doctor. A shame that now she has nothing left but her life in my hands. This is the... You have 48 hours to hand over the entire Boston territory to me, all routes, businesses, and connections, everything. If you refuse, I will send her back to you piece by piece, starting with these lovely fingers." Lorenzo seized Alina's hand and held it up to the camera, the fingers that had once held a scalpel, and saved hundreds of lives now trembling in the grasp of a killer. 48 hours. Do not insult my intelligence. The video. Dominic remained motionless for a second, then another, then a third, before rising and smashing his solid oak desk with a single punch, wood splintering, papers flying, the laptop crashing to the floor and shattering. He roared like a wounded beast, the sound echoing through the estate, and within moments Raffle and dozens of armed guards rushed into the study, weapons ready. Marchetti, Dominic growled, his storm-gray eyes now black pits filled with lethal intent. Mobilize. Find her. Now. Raffle nodded and turned to issue orders, but before he could leave, a small sob sounded from the doorway. Everyone turned to see Marcus standing there, eyes red, tears streaming down his cheeks. He had heard his father's roar, run to see what was happening, and seen the video still playing on Dominic's phone. "Mother Alina," Marcus said, his voice trembling and broken. They took Mother Alina. Dominic's heart, the heart he believed had hardened beyond repair, shattered at the sight of his son's tears. Marcus ran to him, clutching his jacket, and spoke the longest sentence he had said since his mother Victoria left. "Daddy, please save Mother Alina. I do not want to lose another mother. Please. Save her. You need her to. Please." Dominic dropped to his knees and pulled his son into his arms, feeling Marcus's small body shaking with sobs, and he swore with everything he had. "I will bring her back," Dominic said, his voice deep and unbreakable. "I promise. Even if I have to burn the world, I will bring her back." He rose, placed Marcus in the care of a trusted servant, and turned to Raffle. "Gather everyone," he ordered coldly. "Find the traitor inside the estate. Interrogate him by any means necessary. I want to know where Alina is being held within 6 hours. And when I find him," he looked out the window, his gray eyes dark as a sky before a storm, "Lorenzo Marchetti will beg to die." The traitorous servant lasted less than 2 hours under interrogation, and in the basement of the Vale estate, the same place where Dominic's father had once taught him his first lessons in violence, the man finally broke and confessed everything: the abandoned warehouse in Quincy, the 20 gunmen loyal to Lorenzo, the exact location where Alina was being held, and Dominic looked down at the man writhing on the floor, blood and tears streaking a face twisted by agony, feeling nothing but cold contempt as he ordered Raffle to finish it, and turned to climb the stairs where more than 100 Vale family soldiers were already waiting, armed to the teeth and ready for war. At midnight the Vale convoy left the estate like a black storm cloud rolling through the city, 20 black SUVs slicing through the quiet streets of Boston, headlights cutting the darkness as they headed toward Quincy, and in the lead vehicle Dominic checked his pistol with the practiced motions of a man who had done it thousands of times, Raffle beside him watching with concern and suggesting body armor, a warning Dominic ignored because his own safety meant nothing to him now. Nothing mattered except bringing Alina home, because Marcus needed her, because for the first time in years he had found something worth living for beyond power and money, and if he had to die tonight to save her he would. The warehouse in Quincy stood in an abandoned industrial zone surrounded by barbed wire and heavy darkness, Lorenzo's men having set up a perimeter they believed would hold, convinced they had 48 hours to negotiate, convinced Vale would hesitate, and they were catastrophically wrong. Dominic did not wait to exit the vehicle properly. The moment the convoy reached the perimeter he was out, gun firing in rapid succession, one guard falling, then another, then a third, as behind him the Vale gunmen poured in like a black tide and gunfire shattered the silence of the night, the raid turning into a massacre as Dominic led the charge into the warehouse, killing anyone who appeared in his path without hesitation, moving like death itself, every step leaving bodies behind, every shot claiming a life, blood splattering the walls, screams mixing with gunfire, the stench of gunpowder filling the air. Lorenzo's hired men no match for the fury of a Mafia boss driven mad by the threat to the woman he loved, some trying to flee, some trying to surrender, but Dominic spared no one because there would be no prisoners tonight. He tore through the dark corridors, kicking in doors, searching for Alina, hearing gunshots behind him and Raffle shouting orders, but never slowing, focused on a single purpose until he reached a locked steel door at the end of the hall, shot the lock apart and kicked it open to find Alina on the cold concrete floor, bound hand and foot, a rag stuffed in her mouth, clothes torn, her body bruised and battered, and when she looked up and saw him standing there, her swollen brown eyes filled with tears as she whispered through the gag that he had really come. Dominic rushed to her, dropped to his knees, cutting through the restraints with hands still stained with his enemy's blood, pulling the gag free and then crushing her against his chest in the first true embrace he had ever given her. Not a performance, not a ritual, but a desperate need to feel that she was alive, that she was still here. And he was not too late, and he whispered into her hair an apology spoken with a trembling he had never shown anyone, swearing he would never let anyone hurt her again ever. Alina sobbed in his arms, her weak hands clutching his jacket, her body shaking with pain and relief, having believed she would die in that dark room, that fate would once again take everything just as she had begun to hope. But he had come for her, truly come for her, and when she whispered that she wanted to go home, that she wanted to go back to their child, Dominic lifted her carefully as if she were made of fragile glass and carried her out. Outside the battle was over, more than 20 of Lorenzo's gunmen lay scattered across the warehouse, blood pooling on the concrete floor, Vale soldiers standing guard with weapons still raised, awaiting orders, and Raffle ran up reporting full control of the situation and asking about Lorenzo, prompting Dominic to pause and scan the bodies until a gunman pointed to a corner where Lorenzo Marchetti lay curled on the ground, wounded in the leg from a failed escape, his former arrogance gone, replaced by raw terror as he begged Dominic for mercy, offering money, negotiation, anything. Dominic placed Alina into Raffle's care with orders to get her to the vehicle and call a doctor immediately, then turned back and walked to Lorenzo, looking down at his enemy with eyes cold as ice as he spoke in a low even tone like a death knell that, because Lorenzo had touched what was his, he would not die quickly, and Lorenzo's screams echoed through the warehouse for the next 2 hours before a final gunshot ended everything. When Dominic stepped outside, dawn was breaking, the first light of sunrise painting the horizon pink, and as he looked toward the vehicle where Alina was being tended, he finally exhaled for the first time that night, because she was safe, and she was going home. Alina was brought back to the Vale estate just as dawn began to break, her body fragile and bruised yet still breathing, still alive, and Dominic carried her into the bedroom and laid her on the bed with the reverence one would give a priceless and delicate treasure, before immediately calling Dr. Harrison Webb, the Vale family's private physician for over 20 years, a man of 55 with silver hair and kind eyes who had seen countless wounds and deaths in the underworld, yet never lost the conscience of a true healer. And within 20 minutes Harrison arrived with his medical equipment and began examining Alina while Dominic stood by the bed without taking his eyes off her for even a second, watching as Harrison checked the bruises on her face and body, dressed the cut on her hand, and started intravenous fluids to restore hydration and electrolytes, finally telling Dominic that she had been beaten badly but had no serious internal injuries and with proper rest and care she would recover, then pausing as he studied Alina's still form as if something stirred in his memory, pulling out a small flashlight to check her pupils and watch their reaction to the light before suddenly freezing, whispering in shock that it could not be possible as he turned to Dominic with wide eyes and asked who she was and where he had found her. And when Dominic answered that he had found her under a bridge, Harrison sank into a chair as though his legs could no longer support him, and said with awe and disbelief that she was Dr. Alina Cross, the legendary neurosurgeon of Massachusetts General Hospital, a genius he had once seen lecture at a medical conference 5 years earlier. A woman the medical world believed had died or vanished forever after that scandal, and Harrison told Dominic what he knew of her brilliance, her impossible surgeries, the tragedy of losing her family, and the wrongful case that had destroyed her, adding that many in medicine never believed she was guilty, that the complication during that operation had been unavoidable, and that the patient's family had too much power and had crushed her, while Dominic listened in silence, his face unchanging as he had known this truth from the very beginning. Yet his admiration for Alina deepened, understanding she was not only a woman who had survived hell but also a lifesaver, a genius robbed of everything by injustice. 3 days later Alina woke and opened her eyes to the familiar ceiling of her room in the Vale estate, the afternoon light filtering through the curtains, and Dominic sitting beside the bed with his head bowed and eyes closed as if he had been there for days. And when she softly called his name in her hoarse voice he jolted awake and his face lit up with relief, as he told her she had slept for 3 days and that he had thought, stopping himself before finishing the sentence though she understood, and before she could speak the door burst open and Marcus rushed in like a small storm, throwing his arms around her and sobbing into her shoulder as he said she was awake and begged her not to leave him, not to go away like Victoria, the mother who had abandoned him 5 years ago, saying he needed her, and Alina hugged him despite the pain coursing through her body, and whispered promises that she was not going anywhere, that she would stay with him forever, while Dominic watched his wife and son clinging to each other, and for the first time in his life made no effort to hide his emotions as tears streamed down the face of the man who had killed without blinking the night before, now crying at the sight of his family reunited. That night, after Marcus had fallen asleep and the estate lay silent, Dominic returned to Alina's room where she sat propped against the headboard gazing out the window at the moonlit garden, and he sat beside her and for a long while neither spoke, until he finally said in a low serious voice that he needed to tell her something. That when he first brought her there he had only thought of Marcus and needed someone who could help his son and had not thought of himself. Then turning to her with storm-gray eyes softened in a way she had never seen, telling her that now everything was different and that he no longer wanted her only to be Marcus's mother but truly his wife, not because of a contract, not because of his son, but because of him, because he loved her, and Alina looked at him with brown eyes shining in the moonlight, having believed her heart had died forever after losing David and her children, believing she could never love again. Yet now feeling something begin to beat inside her chest as she whispered through tears that she too had thought she was dead, but that he and Marcus had brought her back and that she loved him, and Dominic gently lifted his hand to her cheek, brushing away her tears before leaning down to kiss her for the first time, a soft trembling kiss not born of burning passion or blind desire but of love forged through suffering, of two shattered souls learning to heal each other, of hope rising quietly from the ashes of the past. After that night, Dominic made a decision he had never made for anyone outside his own blood. He would use all of his power and every resource at his disposal to clear Alina's name. Because while he could not change the past, could not bring David and the 2 children back, could not erase the years of hell she had endured, he could restore the honor that had been stolen from her so unjustly. And so he hired the sharpest private investigators, the most ruthless legal minds, and did not hesitate to use the invisible networks of the underworld to dig for the truth. And within 2 weeks the full picture of Alina's wrongful conviction began to surface, revealing that the head nurse who had testified against her had received a large sum of money from Senator Harrison's family shortly after the trial, a new house in Florida and a bank account overflowing with cash, with Dominic's investigators uncovering wire transfer records, phone calls between the nurse and the Harrison family's lawyers before the trial, even an audio recording in which the nurse admitted to a relative that she had lied under oath. And Dominic did not stop there. He arranged a meeting with William Harrison, the senator's son who had sworn to make Alina pay, sitting across from him in a high-end Boston restaurant where Dominic needed no threats, only his cold storm-gray stare and the quiet placement of evidence on the table, proof of bribed witnesses and a manipulated trial, offering 2 choices: voluntarily withdraw the charges and admit wrongdoing, or watch every major newspaper publish the truth along with other details the Harrison family would desperately want buried. And William Harrison chose the first option. 1 month later, Alina's case was reopened, and with new evidence of perjury and judicial corruption, the court overturned the conviction and declared her innocent, her medical license fully restored, the news spreading through the medical world like wildfire. Dr. Alina Cross was alive and vindicated, with Massachusetts General Hospital issuing an official apology and offering her a higher position and higher pay, followed by invitations from other prestigious hospitals competing for the legendary name, all of which Alina declined, choosing instead to sit with Dominic in the library where she and Marcus had spent countless hours and explain her decision, telling him she did not want to return to the old world of polished hospitals and wealthy patients, that she wanted to do something that truly mattered, her brown eyes lighting with a fire he had never seen before as she said she wanted to open a clinic for the homeless and the poor, because she had been one of them, because she knew what it felt like to be abandoned and forgotten and denied even the most basic medical care, and she wanted to help those who had no one. And Dominic smiled, a rare genuine smile, and told her he would build her a hospital, not a small clinic but a full hospital with the most advanced equipment and the best staff, free for anyone who needed it, bringing tears to Alina's eyes as she whispered that he had already given her too much, only for him to take her hand and tell her he did not do it because he had to but because he wanted to, because she deserved it, because the world needed someone like her, and because he loved her. 6 months later, Cross Vale Hospital opened its doors in South Boston, not far from the bridge where Dominic had first found Alina, a modern 5-story building with full departments from emergency to surgery, internal medicine to mental health, all free for the homeless and the poor. And as Alina stood at the entrance on opening day watching the line of people waiting for care, familiar faces from beneath bridges, from shelters, from forgotten streets, she knew she was no longer a victim. She had turned her suffering into strength, found a new purpose not in prestige or wealth, but in serving those who needed her most. 1 year after the night Dominic knelt beneath the bridge, they held their true wedding, not a proposal born of mud and darkness, not a ring slipped hurriedly onto the thin finger of a woman who was slowly dying, but a real ceremony, with fresh flowers, sacred hymns and vows spoken before God and the people they loved most. Choosing an old church in Cambridge, a grey stone building with stained glass windows that had stood for more than 2 centuries, bearing witness to countless marriages and promises. Alina did not want a lavish Mafia wedding filled with displays of power and thousands of guests. She wanted simplicity and sincerity, and Dominic agreed without hesitation, inviting only 80 people, those who truly mattered, the Vale family, Alina's closest colleagues from the new hospital, and a few friends they had gained along their long journey of healing. Victor Vale was there as well, seated in the front pew, his expression still rigid but no longer defiant, changed by seeing Marcus speak again, by watching his grandson smile and cling to Alina as if she were his own mother. And though he never said it aloud, he had accepted this daughter-in-law and even come to respect her for what she had done for the family. The ceremony began in the late afternoon as warm golden sunlight streamed through the stained glass, casting shimmering colors across the gray stone floor, and Dominic stood at the end of the aisle in a classic black suit, feeling a nervousness he had never known before, one unrelated to danger or violence, his heart racing, his hands faintly trembling, and when the church doors opened, he forgot how to breathe. Alina entered in a simple yet elegant white gown, not an extravagant dress but a refined design that embraced her now healthy body, her brown hair swept into an elegant updo with soft curls framing her face, and on her lips was a radiant smile he had never seen before, so beautiful that Dominic felt as though he were watching an angel step out of sunlight itself. Yet what made the moment perfect beyond anything else was Marcus, the 9-year-old boy walking beside her in a small suit that mirrored his father's, holding a red velvet pillow with the wedding rings, moving with pride and solemn determination as if carrying out the most important task of his life, and when he looked up at Alina and then at his father, the smile on his face brought tears to many eyes inside the church. They stood before the priest, hands entwined, and spoke their vows, Dominic first, his voice deep and steady yet carrying a tremor those who knew him had never heard, swearing to love her, protect her, stand by her in health and illness, in wealth and poverty, until death parted them, then adding with a breaking voice that he vowed to spend the rest of his life becoming a man worthy of the love she had given him. Alina spoke next, tears streaming down her cheeks though her smile never faded, thanking him for seeing her when the world had forgotten she existed, for giving her a family when she believed she would be alone forever, and promising to love him and Marcus, to stand beside them through every storm, and to turn their house into a home filled with laughter and love. When the priest declared them husband and wife and Dominic kissed Alina, Marcus jumped up and shouted with joy that his parents were really married now, and the church erupted in laughter through tears. That moment, bathed in golden light, filled with Marcus's laughter, and the kiss of two once shattered souls now healing together, becoming a picture no one present would ever forget. After the ceremony, before attending the small reception at the Vale estate, Alina asked Dominic to take her somewhere, and they drove to Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge. Lily and Noah rested, Alina walking among the rows of graves beneath maple trees turning gold and red in the autumn light, holding 3 bouquets of white roses, while Dominic and Marcus followed at a respectful distance. She knelt before the 3 graves side by side, laid flowers on each, and spoke softly to those she loved most, apologizing to David for taking so long to visit, telling him she had walked through hell but survived and found a reason to keep living, then turning to the 2 smaller graves and telling Lily and Noah that she missed them every day, that they would always be her angels, but that now she had another angel to care for, a little boy who needed her as they once had, and she hoped they would be happy that she had found joy again, before standing, wiping her tears, and promising she would live fully, for herself and for them. Dominic stepped beside her and took her hand. Marcus ran forward and wrapped his arms around her waist, and the 3 of them stood there together, before the graves of the past as the autumn wind carried golden leaves through the air like a quiet blessing from those who were gone. 3 years have passed since the day Alina stepped into Dominic Vale's life beneath the dark bridge in South Boston, 3 years since the most reckless proposal this city had ever witnessed, 3 years of tears, of healing, of love, and of miracles. And now as she stands on the balcony of the Vale estate overlooking a garden flooded with the golden light of an autumn afternoon, Alina can hardly believe how far she has come. No longer the gaunt ghost curled beneath a bridge, no longer the hollow woman who had given up on living, but the director of Crossvale Hospital, the largest nonprofit hospital in Boston dedicated to the homeless and the poor, a place that serves thousands of forgotten souls every year, people who were once just like her, where she has turned her pain into a calling and used the hands that once wanted to end her life to save hundreds of others. Marcus, now 11 years old, sits beneath the oak tree in the garden, absorbed in a thick medical textbook. The silent child he once was transformed into a confident, lively boy who speaks with ease, excels in school, and knows exactly who he wants to become, often telling everyone that he wants to be a doctor like Mom Elena because he wants to save lives, words that always force Elena to turn away and hide her tears of joy, because though she did not give birth to Marcus, he is her son in every way that truly matters, the child she stayed with through nightmares, taught about the human body and compassion, and watched grow from a broken boy into one filled with hope and love. Dominic has changed as well, still the head of the Vale family, still the man Boston fears, but one who has abandoned much of the illegal world, steering his empire toward legitimate paths like real estate, hotels and restaurants, businesses he can proudly show his son, doing it for Alina, for Marcus, for the family they built from the ashes of the past. Victor Vale, the father who once fiercely opposed this marriage, has become a loving grandfather, often visiting to listen to Marcus talk about school and his dream of becoming a doctor, warmth now glimmering in eyes that were once ice cold. And then there is Hope, a 2-year-old girl with her father's black hair and her mother's brown eyes, toddling across the lawn as Marcus runs after her protectively. Hope, the name Elena and Dominic chose because that is exactly what she represents: hope for the future, hope for love, hope that even from the darkest places light can still find its way through. And when Alina was pregnant with Hope, she cried through many nights, not from sorrow but because she never believed she would be a mother again after losing Lily and Noah, believing that part of her died with them in the fire. Yet hope arrived like a miracle, a reminder that life always finds a way forward and that love never truly ends, it only changes shape. That afternoon the family sits together on the grass behind the estate beneath golden leaves drifting like butterflies in the autumn wind. Marcus reading medical pages aloud to Hope, who understands nothing yet listens with wide eyes. Dominic holding Alina's hand, his fingers interlaced with hers, their wedding rings glinting in the fading sun. And Alina rests her head on his shoulder and whispers, "Thank you for saving me," only for Dominic to kiss her hair and answer softly that no, she is the one who saved him. They sit there, 4 people, a family pieced together from broken fragments, built on pain and loss, yet stronger than any born of silk and privilege, proof that the past does not define the future, that even the deepest wounds can heal, and that sometimes miracles come from the most unexpected places. And beneath the glowing yellow leaves, with Marcus and Hope's laughter echoing through the air, Alina closes her eyes and smiles, remembering how she once wanted to die, how she once stood on a bridge begging for the end, and now knowing she was right not to jump, right to keep living even by a fragile breath, because had she given up she would never have met Dominic, never become Marcus's mother, never held Hope in her arms, life having taken everything from her only to give it all back in a way she could never have imagined. If you have listened to this story until now, perhaps your heart has walked alongside Alina and Dominic through every pain and every joy, because this is not just a love story but a story of human strength, of overcoming adversity, of how sometimes all we need is one person willing to believe in us when we have stopped believing in ourselves. And if this story touched you or reminded you of something in your own life, we invite you to share your feelings in the comments below, because we truly want to hear what lives in your heart. And if you found meaning here, please remember to like the video, share it with those you love, and subscribe to our channel so you do not miss more moving stories each day. Wishing all of you watching good health, a joyful life, and days filled with peace. And always remember that no matter how deeply life may push you down, there is always hope, always a chance to begin again, and always someone out there willing to see your worth. Thank you for listening, goodbye, and see you in the next video.